Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. Today we're doing the Dialdo character review. Now, per usual, it's going to be the character overview, going over some of the big things about who he is, the base and total stat analysis, looking at some of the other stats and metrics, all leading up to the report card where we can kind of grade those stats in the context of the rest of his kit. We'll then look at the general thoughts, which kind of encapsulate everything. That includes a preview of some of the passives, the counter abilities, the job abilities, and auto priority of how his AI works, the TMR review, and then just some overviews of the vision card potential, the Esper Synergies, and weapon optimization. So, kicking things off, brand new Earth unit added here to Global as one of the Crystal Warriors. They've given him the unique main job, the Servant of the Void Despair. He's also got the Kotodama Wielder and Red Mage sub jobs as a Spear user. He does equip hats, cloths, and accessories with a move of 3, jump of 1 as a 100 cost unit. Now, for faith levels, there's an argument to be made for whether he's 50, 70, or 97 faith. I will talk about that a little more in the general thoughts section once we get a little deeper into his character, but even though he's a magic scaling damage dealer, there's a case to be made for anything on that gradient. It's really just kind of situational. Now, for the attributes of the main job itself, his max range is only 3 squares away, so very short range on the main job. His limit break does technically go a square further, upwards of 4 squares away, though important to remember. And in terms of AoEs versus single target attacks, he's got 1 AoE on that main job and 3 single target attacks, though most of them have the piercing ability where it can technically hit through 2 people, but it'll scale off their unit resistance. We'll see that more soon. Now, for weapon type resistance, there's a couple strong ones here: 20% to both slash and magic, 15% to missile, 10% to strike, and the minus 5% to pierce as the only negative here. Now, being a higher skewing faith unit, should be cognizant of what he can be afflicted by. And just looking here, it's slow, immobilized, and 10% to berserk. Honestly, a couple good ones here. The slow and berserk ones we are seeing a little more of an uptick in, though I do like the immobilized one here, just from a pure theoretical perspective, that as a tank, if you ever got immobilized and couldn't properly get to the front line, that would be a debilitating thing to be afflicted by. So I do like the 50% there. Now, for the mastery ability, the unique things they've given him are 20% extra HP and 10 spirit penetration. His dream upgrader, the transcendence ability, is 10 AoE resistance and 10% extra magic damage as part of the formula. And it's a really interesting way they've chosen to go about this for damage up, but because his magic stat, as we'll see soon, isn't all that impressive. Now, for the base stat perspective, he is the second highest base HP person in the game, only behind Engelbert, so very strong base HP overall. The magic stat, though, he's essentially one of the lowest. He's only above Sakura, actually, for base magic, and she's really my cutoff. So he's essentially like one of the worst base magic units I really think of when I categorize magic units. That being said, there are a couple ways he gets around that, and we'll talk more soon, but really it's the pierce type damage, that extra 10% damage at the end of the equation. It's not the end of the world. Now, for agility, basically average here for base agility. For dexterity, skews lower on the side of things for base dexterity, and his base luck is actually relatively high, which is a good thing here as we see in terms of at least crit evasion, not for the evasion. For the total stat analysis, as we kind of, transform those charts into one, looking at them compared to other UR units, obviously the HP is max top of the charts, no surprise there. The magic being the bottom, very evident from what we just saw. The rest of the stats are really neither here nor there. When we incorporate the board nodes, the mastery ability and things, there's a couple changes, but nothing terribly significant. It's roughly the same here. He does take a slight step back on that luck, just from what they give him on the board. They do make up for the agility, and in terms of sources of some of those stats, 9 agility here, that's fine, that's basically average. But no real surprises on the total stats as compared to the base stats. It's pretty much the same picture that gets painted overall. Now we look at the agility. He does come in at roughly that 79-ish agility, and so for characters that don't have passives equipped, he's a couple points above average. Once you start including that cast of characters and assuming they have passives equipped, he does take a slight step back, but overall 79 is still a relatively average spot for agility, particularly for tanks. That's not necessarily a bad thing here. When we look at the crit hit and crit avoid, again, these scaling directly off his dexterity and luck stat. Same correlation here where that dexterity does end up being relatively low. The luck also comes in relatively low here in the crit avoidance rate, so the crit avoidance rate maybe keep an eye out for, but really not a debilitating thing either. Now look at the accuracy. Horrendously bad accuracy, one of the worst in the game, around bottom 10, bottom 15. He does not have any accuracy passives. He's got 1 guaranteed hit though in the Kotodama Sub job, but other than that, do not expect him to be hitting anything. He'll even miss on evade tanks quite easily. Now we look at the evasion perspective for himself. He does not even come remotely close to a potential evade unit, even though that base luck stat is above average. He just doesn't have enough overall to really do anything with it, despite the fact that being part of the Earth cast kind of like Light. A lot of times those characters do end up getting some of this like very low end evade potential. He is not one of them. Now for the report card, effective HP, and again, I'm trying to grade these in the context of the tanks, not necessarily all the damage dealers that we see in the game. Obviously, it's kind of apples to oranges, trying to compare them exactly. So keep that in mind as I kind of run through here on some of these stats. But the effective HP compared to tanks, actually a B. The effective HP, again, just to recall exactly what it is, it's specifically looking at the health pool, the resistances, the defense and spirit, some of the AoE and unit resistance, nothing about the kit for survivability, which is this next grade. So compared to other tanks, that effective HP, it's just a step down, but still very, very good. 8 defense and 6 spirit innately. He does get another 12 defense on the passive. His main buff will also give him another 20 defense, so definitely skews quite heavily on the physical side from the defense perspective. He does have an innate 10 AoE resistance and 15 unit resistance on the passive, but he does have some upside to add on to these numbers, as we'll see soon in the general thoughts. Now, in terms of survivability, though, going with an A, that 50% debuff weakening ability, and I'll talk more about how that works in the abilities section, very, very strong for him. 80 element chain resistance is also very strong. That's a proper threshold to really take advantage of the damage reduction. He's also got shell capability, which is obviously great to go with that 20% magic res. He does have a counter ability that's very strong. That's essentially a 50% chance to reduce all physical damage by 30%. He's also got a 20% chance to heal 20% of his health. So he's got this little metric to kind of keep his health pool going. He's also got access to a magic barrier with 20 AoE resistance on the sub job, and he's got a couple magic passives as well. So overall survivability is definitely an A, very much equipped for the modern era of the game with what you would hope a tank to have. Overall, I think it's a really strong point for him. Now for damage, going with a C+ here, but this has got a massive asterisk on it. This obviously hinges very heavily on enemy pierce resistance, where there really isn't any pierce res pen in the game, so this damage number is going to be vastly different just depending on that stat alone. The magic stat doesn't get very high, neither does necessarily the spirit penetration. It's really only that 10 spirit penetration on the MA2. He's got no other spirit penetration in the kit, but because it scales off spirit, and he's got that extra 10% damage at the end of the equation, he does actually hit relatively hard. At least again, compared to tanks, some tanks hit like a wet noodle. He's not, but he can, depending on that pierce res. But overall, very creatively done. Now agility, like kind of we saw on the chart here, is basically a C. He's basically average. No real way to increase that internally, at least. The accuracy, going with an F. Absolutely horrendous accuracy. Does work well for him, though. We'll talk about more of that in the general thoughts, why that's a good thing for him to have horrendous accuracy. He does have the 100% hit chance on the Kotodama Sub job, though. From an evasion perspective, going with a D, not an evade unit whatsoever. The movement is an A, though. He's got a move +1 passive, and the Kotodama technically has that move and jump +1. That's really more for manual or PvE content, but certainly a nice thing that he has access to that not other tanks do. Now, the auto ease of use. Going with a C here. Now, from an AI perspective, relatively predictable rotation. The passives require just a little bit of extra thought, though, because again, if you're deciding between move +1, you need to make sure that your spacing and character movements properly done. You also have that faith debate talking about, status effects and damage output and healing received. There's some debate on the sub jobs too, which one's best. Although very strong so far, there are some things that I think people can get hung up on just from an auto ease of use. Now the game disruption, though, I'm going with an A- here. Hugely enables Earth. We just got the Miraga, 140 and that basically free reincarnation because it doesn't require the UR scrolls. That being said, Miraga, as good as he is, and he is the best selection quest unit by far, Dialdo does things to enable Earth in ways that Miraga doesn't do as well in the modern era of War of the Visions. Now, for most people, Miraga is just fine, quite honestly. But for where this game is expected to go, I think Dialdo has way more tools to be equipped to enable Earth. So yeah, A- for that. For the passives, going with an A- here too. Good versatility with passives for different situations. The counter, going with basically an S. All three are an amazing counter option to go with. Really, really strong point of his. The overall job and kit, also going with an A here. Amazing utility, excellent sub-job options. Does his job exactly the way you'd want him to for a final grade of an A. Now, yes, I do think he's one of the best tanks in the game. I think there's a lot to look forward to. I think he's a good character to invest in because you will get some return on investment, not only for him relative to Earth, but also him with Ice, for those of you that are going for Dark Golem and some of that overlap. We have some good Pierce-related vision cards that we're going to see at the end of the presentation here that he could be a part of that as well. So there's a lot of things and a lot of situations that he'll just end up giving you a lot of value. Overall, going with an A. Now, for the general thoughts, huge variety of survivability tools. As a tank, this is the most important thing to examine, and there is a lot to cover. His main buff alone has 4 things that it does. It's 20 defense, that debuff weakening of 50%, and let me pause to explain that. Talked about this on the podcast, but the way we know debuff res currently is that the percentage affects the odds of it happening. So if you have defense debuff res 25%. Normally, if someone does a defense break on you, it's going to happen. It's a 100% chance it happens. That reduces the odds of it happening to 75%. This is different, though, in that it affects the potency of the debuff. So, for something like Skahal, who's got that 38% lightning imperil, this reduces the actual percent of the imperil itself from 50%, so 38 down to 19. Very, very strong for overall mitigating how much damage a lot of those debuffs and imperils do. He does also have Shell here, which is great for the magic damage, and that counter ability that he creates for himself, that 50% chance to proc, 50% coin flip, it will reduce all physical damage by 30%. Very, very strong. Now, in addition to that, his second buff gives him that elemental chain resistance of 80. Definitely helps with the chaining, particularly for tanks that are a little bit slower, where you might get lapped and might accumulate some chain damage. That's a very good thing for him. His heal back counter, generating 20% of his health, is very strong. We'll talk about some of the numbers soon. He's got an innate 10 AoE resistance and 15 unit resistance. He'll get another 20 unit resistance on his limit break. He gets 8 AoE resistance on his weapon, so you'll basically have perma 18 AoE resistance. These are both very strong for him. Most tanks usually get one or other, not typically both though. Now, his main AoE ability is also a dispel, which is great for survivability, in that if you can just dispel a bunch of buffs that a DPS has or a tank has, that obviously does very well for you not receiving the full brunt of their potential. And his 120 ability is also a decrease AP of 20, so while you might be using that on tanks a lot, if you are using it on a damage dealer to reduce AP by 20 and essentially allow them to run out of abilities sooner, does fare well for how much damage they'll end up doing to you. So overall, survivability tools, very creatively done here, a lot of ways to mitigate damage. Now, for the utility perspective, again, that Dispel is great for being able to remove those buffs from characters. He does have a reduced counter chance of 100 on that decrease AP of 20 as well, so really nice bit of utility there. He's got Confusion status effect on his low AP ability. He's also got access on his main sub job to 25% Earth and Lightning resistance for AoE to himself and teammates. That's a nice thing to have. He does have Cura and Asuna on the Red Mage subjob, and on the Resistance Break ability, he's got a 38% Spirit Imperil and Dispel Re-Raise on the Red Mage sub. So very strong amount of utility here from both the main and sub job potential. He does have that lower agility and accuracy, but that's perfect for him as a tank. Again, tanks that are lower agility, one of the upsides is that if you don't get as many turns, that means your buffs don't wear off as fast. So if you have a tank that's super speedy and they get 4 to 5 turns, well, their buff that they use turn 1 is likely worn off relatively quickly. That's not the case here for some of those slower tanks. That accuracy, if you can't hit a character, that means he'll likely use those TP abilities instead. So if he can't hit those units, he'll just rebuff, and as we saw, his buffs are amazing. If you're using the Red Mage sub job, he can put them to sleep, which means it's a guaranteed hit. A lot of good things there overall, despite the fact that those are kind of weaknesses as we know it for a damage dealer perspective. Now, the Pierce Vision card synergy is currently present. It's going to get built out more. Really good things to look forward to for Pierce units there. The Ice and Earth synergy is also great potentially with Dark Golem coming out. He can be built for both physical and magic tanking as well, where we'll see with his passives, he's got some flexibility to do both. He does have some slight AP issues for second Guild War fights, but that's really dependent upon how many buffs he uses and how long the fight goes on. If you can only use one buff, the fight goes on forever, yeah, he's going to be out of AP by that second fight, but just something to keep in mind, but there are ways around it, and Dark Golem is one of those ways, where that new Vision card coming out, if you can pull for it and you're going all in on Dialdo, is 58% acquired AP, which is obviously a big amount of AP for him to generate off of those buffs. Not only is the Vision card amazing, but the Esper is too. We'll talk about the Esper soon. Finally, I would assume that, the faster you can end the battles with him, the better. He only has 5 and 8 hate based off that passive. He can generate another 12, but again, that's dispellable. It's depending upon you getting 2 buffs off. If it's only 1 buff, then he won't use it. So, you do want to end fights relatively quickly with him. He's not like Snow and Alphonse, where they have 5 to 6 hits before that hate is gone. Now for the passive abilities, 2 of the best ones in my opinion. Beacon of True Silence is the must. That's the 12 defense, the 5, the hate of 5, and the unit res of 15. This is exceptionally important to keep on. I do like Born of the Void for that second passive, though. That move 1 is certainly nice for him to maintain that frontline presence and making sure that he doesn't fall too far behind your other characters. Other than that, you have some flex options, and it's mainly tied to that magic resistance if you want to, where obviously Mage's protection has the Spirit of 12 and the magic resistance of 15. If you're trying to hard counter lightning, obviously we have that ability with the Lightning Spirit Blessing as well. Red Mage lore is probably more for PvE content, which I do think there's an upside for him in some PvE things. We'll talk about that soon, but Earth is one of the most stacked PvE casts, so I think it's a hard sell that he'd be a major factor in that, but we'll talk about more. It's something to consider. Now for the counter abilities, this is still not enough is exceptionally strong. It's a 20% chance to heal 20% of your HP. And so if your HP is 12,000 and heals back 20% of that, you're talking 24 healing just like that. Now, if you have the Healing Power 10 passive, that increases to 24% healed. And if you have the Defense and Spirit set also equipped, that's 28% restored. And so essentially, that extra 4% would be an extra 480 healing every time it procs, and that 8% difference is an extra 960 healing every time it procs. Very, very strong for his effective HP just to keep himself going and replenishing some of it self-sufficiently. Now, Steel to Thermal Form, I think, is a step down, but I still think it's an overall solid tank ability, just to flat out reduce the damage taken by 30%. This will stack with his other counter ability to reduce physical damage taken, so I think the combination of both is what makes that so strong. But then finally, the magic reflex here, obviously just being able to dodge all magic potential when you talk about gearing him for anti-magic. All three of these counters are very cool. I think this top one's my favorite, though, but very good options for the type of build you want to go for. Now, the main job buffs. His first priority here is Voice of Despair. We've talked about it in depth now. It's those 4 buffs that they give him. The Advocation of Stillness is his hate generation ability. It is the second priority. It also has that elemental chain resistance on it. Only 2 usages of it, unfortunately, but regardless, these are 2 exceptionally good main job buffs. And when we get into the offensive abilities here, now you'll note 3 of them are Pierce oriented, 1 is magic oriented. 2 of them require direct line of sight, that you have to go right through the person. The other 2, you have some flexibility to still hit people. Overall, relatively limited for height, only height 1 on all of these. Relatively limited for range, only 3 squares away for all of these. So again, that's a kind of a nice thing though for some tanks where you don't get baited too early and you can use that second buff. The Return to Nothingness is the real shining star here, having that dispel potential on it, but Existential Deliverance is also a really good one here. The Touch of Transfusion, don't underrate, just for that extra heal back potential too, but being only 1 square away, a little harder to actively use, and although that modifier is high, it will interact differently depending on the sub jobs you have, namely the Red Mage sub job. We'll talk about that in just a couple slides here, but overall, very solid 4 abilities for what he's supposed to do. Now for the Limit Break here, this is a 200% mod, cross-shaped AoE up to 4 squares away, a little costly at 49 AP, but this is a 10% health regen for 3 turns and that unit res of 20, so very strong ability for making sure he doesn't die too early in the fight. In terms of other potential abilities though, he does have access to 2 vision card abilities, and although these scale off physical damage in their attack stats, so he would not do any sort of good damage with these. I'm really thinking more from a PvE perspective that if you wanted to give him the ability to triple hit something or to do a 25 defense break and weave that in there, there is that upside for him. Probably not an auto PvP thing though by any means. Now for the sub jobs, this main job, sub job, Enfeebling Magic Spear is okay. Again, no real difference as it pertains to range. It's still unit res. It's relatively similar in cost. It's a direct line of sight. It is a double hit, which is nice, and it is an attack and magic break, but overall, I don't think this ability does much more than what the main job abilities already do. I do like the Spark and Stone Diffusion for niche applications, though, in countering Earth and Lightning teams. The cool thing about this, and this is very unique to him as a tank, the way the AI works, if you have this sub-job equipped, this is actually the first priority buff. Yes, even above that main buff that we just talked about with the 4 abilities on it. This is the priority if you have it on, but only if there's a teammate next to you or that he can walk to in range. So theoretically, if you have him and a teammate and they both run straight ahead, well, Dialdo's not going to use this ability. Dialdo's going to use his regular rotation. But if you use the AI that you have a teammate, go to Dialdo and buff him, and they're standing next to each other, Dialdo will use this first and move forward and then continue the buff rotation. That is very unique for a tank. Most don't have access to something like this. Or if they do, like King Mont and Mercy's Grace, there's some weird quirks with the timing of it. This is very nice though. I do like this as an option on the sub job. Now for the Kotodama wielder, I like this one only from the anti-magic wall perspective and the unevadable pain. That magic shield, very nice. It's really the AoE resistance, which is the very nice thing though, because even if you get a magic barrier broken, you'll still have that AoE resistance, exceptionally strong buff here. And obviously the 100% hit chance is certainly a nice thing to have access to as well. The rest of these I probably wouldn't lean into too much. And then finally, the red mage sub job, also an exceptionally strong sub job, if only for a resistance break for that Dispel Re-Raise. Very, very powerful ability here. It does slightly overlap with Bradley, though, who does also have a single target Re-Raise remove. And here's the biggest kicker. This is the ability I was referencing, that when you talk about this compared to the main job, this will actually get the priority most of the time over some of those main job abilities because of that 38% Spirit Imperil. It just will, by damage calculations, do more damage. So AI priority, he'll spam this more than the main job abilities, which can be a good thing if you're trying to Dispel Re-Raise, can be a good thing if you have another magic user who can use that 38% Spirit Imperil, but kind of a bad thing that you're not using his main job ability. So there's a double-edged sword to this, but this is a great sub-job. That sleep, as I mentioned, is a great way to deal with Evade, that if you put them to sleep, it's an essentially 100% hit chance on whoever hits them next. Asuna is great, Cure is great. Overall, a lot of good things here to like. Now for the TMR review, this is a very, very good TMR, that it's a 7 agility TMR. The thing that's nice about it is other TMRs that are near this level of agility, Zizabel's excluded, the things like the Lucia boots, the Dark Fina boots are female exclusive. And so having access to all genders and sexes to equip this, that 7 agility is very, very nice. Obviously some nice extra stats here as well. The ability itself, decreased bravery of 20 for 3 turns to whoever you hit, is very nice from a physical damage perspective, and exactly what that means, just some very high level math, just proving this out for you guys. The way that the calculation effectively works is you take all your damage from what you calculate, right? And then you mitigate it based on what the enemy's like defense, resistances are, etc., etc. Once you get that number, you then, the final step is basically to multiply it by a bravery modifier, which is typically 1.47. Well, when you reduce the enemy's bravery by 20, that modifier is 1.27. And so I have scenarios here 1,000 to 6,000 damage just to prove the point, but because the laws of multiplication, it's the same percentage no matter what. It's basically a 13% damage reduction for all physical damage. And while it may not seem like much if you are going against a super physical heavy team, that's actually a noticeable amount of damage reduction. And again, you have to remember, this doesn't apply just for Dialdo, but will apply for your teammates as well, that they will also receive 13% less damage because the person attacking them has a lower bravery. So overall, this is a good TMR. We've seen many, many times where bravery down works very, very well. This doesn't have exactly the same potency as some of the others, but overall, big thumbs up for this TMR. Now for the job-based vision cards, there is some foundational pieces here for Pierce units to thrive in. You have 2 different unit resistance cards here in Believers of the Brotherhood and Nightmare Before Halloween. The Believers in Brotherhood is exceptionally good because it's also got the agility tied to it, but the rest of these, you have some good options here, at least for some extra potential strike res or magic res if you're trying to beef him up or beef your teammates up. And although not all of these cards apply to Dialdo, you have enough foundational pieces that it wouldn't take much extra to really start making a case for why they could be together. Now for the Esper Synergies, this is a tough one because for tanks, it's basically 100% matchup specific. You're looking for element resistances, you're looking for certain agility pieces, you're looking for certain Espers that really make that tank thrive in that whatever matchup you're facing. So, you know, that's really the top priority here. The best Esper all around is Dark Golem that is coming soon, and if you're kind of wondering why, one of the best things about him is that it's got a net total of 20% wind resistance, which is obviously great for Dialdo being naturally weak to wind. But in addition to that, not only does it throw an extra 15 defense your way and 5% HP, but the most important thing is the 5% human resistance, where that's an impenetrable type of a resistance. So you gain a 5%, advantage over all humans attacking you. Yes, a little bit slower at 13 agility, but most of these tankier Espers are like that. Now, in terms of other considerations, I do like Sheraton, who's also got Earth Attack, Crit Evade, and most importantly, the 5 AoE resistance. But per usual, Titan and Golem are great options too, for they also have that Earth Attack. One has Spear, one has Defense. Titan technically has Pierce Attack up, which is great for Dialdo. And Golem technically has Pierce Resistance, which is also great for him, because that's his only negative, in addition to the human killer that it has if you were trying to build the board that way. Either way, Earth Attack as well. These are all 3 great secondary options for him, provided you don't need a specific kind of element resistance as a priority first. If you need ice resistance, build the ice resistance. If you need the dark res, build the demon wall, go the dark res. You get the point. But just some other damage potential options. Obviously, Dark Armu and Bahamut are great as well for the human killer and the agility that they have, where these Espers are far faster than these top 4. And yeah, they do still have some of their own resistances. Dark Armu has the slash, and Bahamut has both strike and magic resistance. So you can lean into the resistances there if you wanted to just go for a faster Esper with some resistances and not the human killer and magic percentage. Now for the weapon optimization, cut and dry, closed case, the Glaive of Emptiness is the best weapon for him. It's the only really like magic oriented spear in the game. The pierce attack and magic attack is great for all of his abilities. You also get the human killer as well, and the AoE resistance of 8 is very, very important. In terms of builds, my recommendation, one of each. Go magic, go aim, but honestly, just stick with the magic build. I think that's solid for most people overall. But that's the Dialdo character review in a nutshell. There's a lot to really like about this character. He is, like Raph in the future, a great tank for the modern era of War of the Visions. You will get a lot of return on investment, and I'm definitely excited to see some of the doors he might open as the game continues to evolve and move on. But that's it for today. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll talk to you all soon.